Hey guys, David Doucette here, Architect Exam Prep. Just wanted to give you a heads up, let you know that the ARE podcast is sponsored by Architect Exam Prep, and that is myself and Eric. If you need any study materials, head over to our website, architectexamprep.com. You can check out our materials there. And also, if you need coaching, we offer that as well, whether you need it for one division or you want to jump all the way in and join our Platinum Coaching Program. You'll find all the information on our website, architectexamprep.com. With that said, let's get into the podcast. ARE Podcast, episode number 53.
Welcome to the ARE Podcast. Where it's all about encouraging and inspiring you today so you can fulfill your dream of becoming a licensed architect tomorrow. And now your host, David Doucette.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the ARE Podcast. My name is David Doucette, and we're joined by our co-host, Eric Coy-Fried. Eric, how are you?
I'm great. Hi, everybody.
So today we have a call of the week we're doing for today's episode. It's a small episode. We have had the call of weeks as part of our micro podcast that we've been launching, but we found out that the micro podcast isn't more than enough to fill 10 minutes, and actually the call of the weeks are too. So we've broken those up to just the micro podcast and then just these calls of the week. So today is our first standalone call of the week. And Eric, what do we have today?
So for the last 4 years, we've been doing these free coaching calls. And there's limited slots that are offered every day. So it's not just, if you're wondering, well, why do you do that and what's the value? The value is we get to talk directly to candidates firsthand and hear about their fears and concerns and insecurities, of which there are a lot, and really kind of help them. And in 15 minutes, we can get through a lot. And so I found doing these calls valuable, which is why we've been doing them for 4 years now. But we also get a lot of insight into the mind of the candidate, because David and I are, as you can see, old. And when we took the tests, it was back, I think it's in the 1860s is when we took the test. And so the call of the week this week is one that I've heard similar stories before, but it was a woman who failed the test 5 years ago and decided to take 5 years off away from it. And it wasn't until she was racked with her own guilt and pressure from her friends and her boss to essentially go back and take the test, which is a horrible position to be in. And now she's having trouble getting started. That story is a pretty typical story.
And you get these stories. I know you're very efficient because you have been doing this for 4 years. You can get to the root of the issue pretty quickly. And these calls are not about slurry walls and VAV double duct systems. I mean, they're about mindset issues, right? So in this kind of call, the problem is stated, right? What do you do to make the candidate feel better in that 15 minutes, or at least give them, not even feel better? It's not a touchy-feely thing necessarily, but what advice do you give them to help them walk away with, that was a productive call, I can be more efficient, or whatever it is?
I hope I'm not giving away my my little trade secrets here, but I don't think I really do anything except ask them the question. And by the end of the call, they've essentially come up with their own solution. I take a much more Socratic approach to it, where I ask them questions about this. So for example, when she failed 5 years ago, well, why do you think you failed? Well, that answer is very enlightening, right? And I've heard, probably the same dozen answers over and over again of why people think they fail. And they're usually, the reason they think they fail is not the reason they fail. That's number one. Number two, then I say, well, why did you take 5 years off? Well, because I'm mad at the format. Well, that already betrays that they don't trust NCARB. They're not happy with the process. They think they're teaching NCARB a lesson by taking 5 years off. And all they're really doing is hurting themselves. So then the third follow-up question would be, well, how do you feel about having taken this 5 years off? Do you feel good? Have you really taught NCARB a lesson here? What have you learned? And they're like, I've learned that I've screwed myself because now it's 5 years later and I'm no closer to getting licensed. So they end up answering their own questions and really seeing by the end of the call what they need to do. I'm just I'm just kind of the impartial observer that's kind of calling them on their BS.
Well, what is interesting, though, because you have been doing this for 4 years, literally every week. I mean, I don't even know if you go on vacation, but it's 20 candidates a week. And in that, you've kind of heard it all. I mean, you've heard of everything about, the same as like the teacher hearing about every excuse about the homework. The dog peed on my homework, all that stuff. Like, you've really heard all the ARE excuses there probably is to hear. So when somebody is telling you something, you can spot pretty quickly, they're not either telling the truth or they're not being honest with themselves. And then, you know exactly the question to ask to sort of just get in there. It's just from experience of just talking to so many candidates.
Yeah, and then there's also a bunch of things that I remind the typical candidate of, right? I say, you're qualified for this test, and they'll say, well, how do you know that? And I'll say, I don't know it, but NCARB knows it because they've approved you to take the test.
By the way,
that's enough for me.
Yeah, let me jump in there because I know we're kind of talking, I guess, more in general of the call of the week, which is sort of the idea because all of your calls have very common themes. There's a handful of themes that come up in all these calls. But one of the things that come up frequently is candidates not feeling like either they're worthy or they deserve to be licensed or that they, have enough knowledge to be licensed. Like, a lot of self-doubt it's not uncommon. You've heard this a lot.
Yeah, I don't have a percentage, but it's certainly a majority of the calls have some semblance of self-doubt, which, by the way, is normal and healthy, and I think everybody has self-doubt. But where it becomes an issue is when the self-doubt becomes crippling, where they're not moving on to their next test because they're afraid of failure or they don't feel they're worthy. And this feeling is overwhelming their ability to actually just clearly just get in front of the test and take it. It's almost like a wall between them and the NCARB screen is what it feels like. And it is, health doubt, normal self-doubt is healthy. Crippling self-doubt is not. And, we've talked recently on a podcast about that overcoming your fear is part of the process, right? It's part of what NCARB's testing you on. They want to see if you're worthy of being licensed. And part of that is seeing if you're able to get your act together and summon enough courage to take these 6 things and pass them. And so self-doubt is very prevalent, unfortunately.
And I like the idea, too, of self-doubt being normal, which I agree. I think it is. And I think probably a lot of calls you get with candidates are just sort of what I would call normal self-doubt. They probably just need a reassurance check-in, or they just, they need somebody to talk to about this process. But it's not necessarily the deep-rooted, I've been at this for 10 years, I've tried 3.0 and 4.0, and I can't get through it. I mean, obviously those come up as well, and those are deeper issues, right? Because now there's that history with this exam. And I mean, it took me 7 years, so I can relate to sort of the length of time somebody spends on this thing.
Well, there are people that drag it out like you did, right? There are people that drag it out, and they're not dragging it out because of fear of failure. They're dragging it out mostly because they get distracted. They get busy with other things. I mean, you have a little bit of ADD, and so I didn't know you back then, but I could see you just getting, I'll go do that for now, right? But yeah. We have a lot of people that drag it out because they are terrified, right? And they've built it up in their mind so much that they don't even know if they can pass. That's a pretty common bucket of people, right? Where maybe I'm not meant to be an architect. I hear that a lot. And it's a shame because it's like, how much time have you invested going to architecture school, buying those expensive, heavy books from Rizzoli, right? Taking side trips to look at buildings. Like it's part of your soul as being an architect. And to give up on your dream in mile 24 of a 26-mile marathon because of a couple tests that were standardized and not designed around you or your experience, to me, it almost seems silly, right? It is hard. Maybe you didn't do it as easily as you thought you might. Maybe it was been a little bit of a reality check for you that you're not as good of a test taker as you thought, or you might need to study a little harder than you anticipated, or you're not an architecture savant. You got to put some work in here. but swallow your pride, get over it, and do it, and you'll pass. That's really it.
And bringing this back to our call of the week and some of those deeper issues that you explored really in 15 minutes, how did that one end up in terms of, did you feel positive? Did the candidate feel positive when she hung up with you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I probably don't hang up with anybody until they're feeling positive. I wouldn't just say, sorry, time's up, and just screw you, click.
By the way, that's why Eric does the calls and I don't.
Because sometimes people will call and say, oh, I was hoping I'd get David. I'm like, oh, you're not going to get David. You don't want David.
Yeah, you don't want David.
He's what we call bad on the phone. But so it ends with me really just asking them some questions about, well, you're blaming it on the format. What is it about the format that you don't like? Well, I don't like this. I don't like this new digital whiteboard, and I don't like the computer, and I don't like this. And I'm like, okay, well, what can you do about it? And they're like, well, nothing. I'm like, okay, well, do you want to keep complaining about something you have no control over, or do you maybe you want to get over it? So it's a little bit of tough love mixed with a little bit of empathy. But they hang up with a clear plan of what they need to do. And generally, I'm pushing them to, look, just get in the game. That's really what I'm pushing them to do. I said, if you want to use our study materials, great. If you don't, great. I just want to know that you have a plan to take a test every month or so, and you'll just knock these things out. And hopefully in a year, you'll have taken all 6 and hopefully passed all 6. But if you didn't, not that big of a deal. I mean, that's generally the mindset that you and I always push. But on the calls, it becomes very personal.
And do you recall sort of the last thing she said to you before you guys ended the call in terms of what plan of action she might take? She's said she'd schedule her next test, which I said, well, technically it's your first test because you haven't passed one yet. So let's get you to just taking it, scheduling a test, studying for it, and passing it. Don't think about all 6 yet. Let's just get to the point of that. Which one do you want to do? She said, well, 5 years ago, the last one I took was site planning and design because it was 4.0. I'm like, okay, well, they don't have that anymore. So, we talked about what a good division would be for her to start with based on her experience. And so she left with a plan to do that. And hopefully she did. Alrighty, I think that's going to wrap it up for our call of the week. On behalf of Eric, my name is David, and we will see you guys on the next ARE podcast.
Thanks for listening to the ARE podcast. Be sure to visit architectexamprep.com and check out our other podcast episodes, video tips, and the ARE blog. Remember to plan, practice, and pass.